On today's episode of The Mythic Masculine.
Robert Bly and Michael May were doing a day for men in LA at the height of the Iron John mania. It's 1989, I think. So that's what I call it.
Is it like Beatlemania?
Well, there was a hunger for a particular kind of being. I'll say not consciousness, but beingness, that people were looking for elegant, eloquent leadership. Because it doesn't necessarily exist, not tied to some brand or something in the culture or cult of personality. And this is much deeper. And so I think there's what Robert did with the book in particular was open up a way for us to really be connected with archetypal energy. Now that I know how to put it into words, everybody was searching for a connection to archetypal energy that's related to the offices of father and of mother in the culture, which don't really exist. Mm-hmm. So Robert was filling a void desperately needed that in many cases the religious institutions and cultural institutions don't fulfill properly, or they do it with a lot of conditions. And when you have to meet those obligations or conditions that they have imposed, you don't feel like you really belong because your soul, in my mind or in my experience, feel highly compromised. Mm.
What does it mean to be a man? And what kind of masculinity is needed to meet these uncertain times? In an era defined by polarized conflict and existential threat, how can we draw upon the rich lineage of mythopoetics to navigate this terrain? I'm your host, Ian McKenzie, and together with an array of guests, we'll explore various pathways to realign masculinity with thriving life. Greetings, dear listener. My guest today is Miguel Rivera, a seasoned ceremonialist, musician, and ritualist. This conversation is a two-part series recorded in 2024 at the 40th anniversary of the Minnesota Men's Conference. Miguel is a longtime facilitator at the conference, where he has played a pivotal role in guiding men through transformative experiences. Miguel's journey began in the vibrant cultural landscape of the 80s, where he was drawn to the path of healing through indigenous medicine and becoming a Sundancer. His involvement in the men's movement began with an invitation from Robert Bly in 1992, where he suddenly found himself at the heart of a cultural force that sought to reconnect men with their inner selves and the sacred. In our conversation today, we delve into the transformative power of men's gatherings and the role of ritual in healing and initiation. Miguel shares his experiences of how these ceremonies amplify healing and create a sense of belonging and brotherhood. We also discuss the challenges faced by modern men, including the lone wolf syndrome and the importance of finding older men who can offer guidance and mentorship. Miguel's insights into fathering and the necessity of creating a safe and nurturing environment for the next generation are both poignant and profound. We ask, what is the legacy and evolution of the mythopoetic men's movement? How can modern men find their way back to a sense of community and belonging in an increasingly isolated world? Before we begin, you're invited to check out my website, The Mythic Masculine, to explore upcoming in-person and online offerings, as well as how to become a paid Substack supporter. This podcast is a true labor of love, and I've never accepted advertising. Instead, I rely on listeners like you to fund the show. So if you found insight and solace from my conversations, please consider upgrading your membership. Visit themythicmasculine.com for more details. And now, enjoy my conversation with Miguel Rivera. Welcome, Miguel, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian.
I always start my interviews by asking the guests to share a little of where they are, or we are, in this moment, as we happen to be sitting together. If you could just plant us here and how you feel in this moment.
Well, let me see. We're at the annual fall Minnesota Men's Retreat. People call it conference, but I prefer to call it retreat because it's really more like a convocation of men. Oh, conference sounds too technical and too difficult, but we've been doing this. I've been coming here for this will be 32 years. And it seems to be a necessary part of my life now to come and celebrate the fall or the beginning of this cycle. And for 32 years of being here, it's an appreciation for the cycles that we are getting in tune with in our lives. Not only, and I consider this to be one of my communities. So it's nice to be here with family, extended family.
As I was looking at the old brochures of this conference, and I should say too, it's something that I've been somewhat aware of a little while. Of course, I found through other men similarly, Iron John, was a way into this broadly mythopoetic men's scene, and that was in 2015. And since then, I've been tracking a lot of these threads of this wake that was set before me. As I found Iron John at 35, also seems to be somewhat mythic number. And as I've tracked kind of like what's happened before and who are the people that have been tending this hearth and giving themselves to it. Of course, different names pop up: Robert Bly, Malidoma Somé, all these folks. And as I was, finally drawn to this particular 40th anniversary, felt important. And I was just looking recently at the table that's in the lodge hall with, memorabilia and these old brochures. And I look at all these names, right? Martin Prechtel as well. And I see yours, right next to all these fellows. So you've clearly been in this, great company for some time and bringing your own medicine to this. And so I wonder, how did you come first to this gathering?
I got invited to these 1992. And then there's two ways I got here. One of them, the first time, Robert Bly and Michael Mead were doing a day for men in LA at the height of the Iron John mania. It's 1989, I think. So that's what I call it.
Is it like Beatlemania?
Well, there was a hunger for a particular kind of being. I'll say not consciousness, but beingness. That people were looking for eloquent, eloquent leadership. Because it doesn't necessarily exist, not tied to some brand or something in the culture or cult of personality. And this is much deeper. And so I think there's what Robert did with the book in particular was open up a way for us to really be connected with archetypal energy. Now that I know how to put it into words, everybody was searching for a connection to archetypal energy that's related to the offices of father and of mother in the culture, which don't really exist. Mm-hmm. So Robert was filling a void desperately needed that in many cases the religious institutions and cultural institutions don't fulfill properly, or they do it with a lot of conditions. And when you have to meet those obligations or conditions that they have imposed, you don't feel like you really belong because your soul, in my mind or in my experience, feel highly compromised. Mm. So at the height of the Iron John mania, right? I'll call it that, or I would say period opening inquiry. They did Michael Mead and Robert Bly did a day for men in LA. So this is what I remember. And so at the end of the day, I knew the organizers. So they said, bring your drums. I'm a professional musician by trade. So I brought my drums. We played. At the end of the day, they rounded up. This is my version of it. They rounded up all the ethnics in the room. Two friends of mine that are Chinese, two guys, the two Latinos in the room and two black guys in the room. And they said, do you want to go meet Michael Mead and James Hillman? And it sounds interesting. So I agreed. So we go to a magic shop on Hollywood Boulevard. And I still remember this. And they were sitting around the table there. And there's James Hillman and Michael Mead. And they explained that they've been doing these men's retreats for a number of years. And they wanted to make it more multicultural. And would we be interested in participating in something like that? And would we be willing to help organize it? One in LA. They were going to do one in the East Coast and one in the West Coast. This is with Robert Bly had agreed to lead it with Haki Madhubuti, I think was one of the other poets, and then Michael and James and several other people that I can't remember right now were part of the crew. So those of us that were in that room agreed to spend a weekend together. And if we didn't kill each other, that's what I remember, we would help. And we went to, one of the guys said, I know some friends that have land in Malibu. So that's where we went, spend the weekend together. And we agreed that we would go. And then at the end of that conversation, Michael Mead said, if you want to go to see what the retreats are like, I invite you to come to Mendocino in the summer. And so I went. And on the way up, I was tasked with picking up Malidoma Somé. So that's how I met Malidoma. Wow. Went to his house in Oakland and we drove up to Mendocino and I had a car full of drums, you know. So after that retreat, I got interested in participating. And a year later, at that time I was working on TV shows. I was doing sound for occasional film here and there, but mostly TV shows. I was working on a show called Northern Exposure. And I was doing the work of 3 individuals in the crew. And one time, working 120 hours a week, and it was crazy. And one morning, I got up and I prayed. I wanted help. I said, I need help. And I prayed to my father, actually, believe it or not. And so and at the end, halfway through the day, I got a call from who's my wife now. Her name is Stephanie. She said, there's a message on our phone machine. The phone calls come from you that you got to listen to. And I go there and it's, hello, this is Robert Bly. And I'm calling to invite you to come to the Great Mother Conference to teach drumming. And it turns out they had wanted to make the Great Mother more multicultural. So Robert had called Michael, and Michael recommended that I get invited to the Great Mother. Mm-hmm. So I got invited to go to Montana that year and teach drumming, and I had already been teaching drumming at the Mendocino conferences, Okay. And so at that point, halfway through the Great Mother, Robert goes, you're coming to Mendocino in July or August, whenever that was. So I ended up going there, and halfway through the retreat in Mendocino, he goes, you're coming to Minnesota in September, So I said, okay, great. Uh-huh. So I've been here since, and that was in 1992 or 93. So I've been here every year since, but basically through the drum. There was an African drum master named Francis Awe in LA who I knew because I had an African Nigerian master drummer too that I studied with. And Francis used to come and hang out with us all the time. And Francis was more of a talking drum master, and my master drummer teacher was a djembe player. And Francis always used to say, the drum has taken me all over the world. So basically the drum once again was taking me all to places that I had no idea I could be in. So I taught drumming here at the beginning, but I had already spent 12 years. In 1980. I met through a recording session again, through drumming, I met several Indian medicine men, elders in Lakota and Creek tribes that were looking for young people to teach. So we got invited to participate, and they taught us how to run sweats, and then they taught us they wanted us to vision quest, and eventually I became a Sundancer. So I danced for 5 years. So by the time I got to this, I'd already been doing Native American ceremony for 12 or 13 years before I got into this realm. And I realized the drum again was taking me to different places, but I was being taught ceremonial practices that we later on would come in to help. So,
wow. I'm struck by the presence of the drum is deeply significant. It seems like infused. And I've heard too, like Michael brought it in, I think as well, like at least initially.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. It was big. It was a huge, it's part of introducing art as a way of creating communication, and also a different way of dealing with the pain that we get, transforming the pain, healing through art, right? So of which the drum is one of them. Drum, dance, song, poetry, all forms of art. Yeah.
Oh, I was heard as well that Bly initially wanted to call this, or maybe it came later, but the Expressive Men's Conference or something, because the mythopoetic men's, maybe didn't sit well with him. But
yeah, they wanted to make it, but they couldn't. At that point, it was out of their control what it was being labeled and what it was going to be called. It was going to be called what it was, no matter what anybody said. So yeah.
And I've heard as well that maybe it was Mead that said this, that even the whole idea of men's movement, was sort of put on it from the outside, because there was a feminist movement. Okay, this must be the men's movement. But he called it something different. He called it soul work. At least Mead did. And so I wonder for you, how do you see this, what this is, maybe what it was and how it continues to be?
Well, I consider it is soul work, but it's also intergenerational, intercultural work. When I was sundancing, in one of the first, my second or third year of sundancing, the intercessor, when we were getting ready to go into the harbor on the first day, he said this: your people should have done this with us when they first came over 500 years ago. On their behalf, you're doing it now. So for me, part of it is retroactive ancestralization rituals that basically bring together the ancestry, the way bringing together descendants, and also connecting the descendants the way the ancestors could never connect themselves to. So you realize for us, the work not only is in the present, but it also helps to heal the past, and it also prevents this kind of confusion and discord to be existing. And so we're seeding the future by coming together the way we ought to have done it, not the way that we did. So
I'm thinking now, my teacher, I've spent many years with Stephen Jenkinson, who I know.
Oh yeah, I know Steve. Sure. Yeah.
And he said something around this idea that, in Canada, we have this thing called truth and reconciliation, right? Yeah. And he's spent a bit of time unpacking that and saying, well, to reconcile, you first have to concile. and that there's something important to recognize, at least, in Canada, probably here too, that there truly wasn't a proper meeting, between the settlers that washed up over here and the people that already lived here. And I wonder what you might say to that too, of like what that means to reconcile now with this way, like as you said, through spirit, through ceremony.
For us, we look at it as making relations, the making of relations. And for us in particular, when you look at all the, every single emblem in Native American, if you up and down the continent, they have all the colors: black, red, yellow, white, blue, green, in some combination. Whenever it's incomplete, it's missing something. So for them, for us, I'll say it that way, if you don't have everything represented, then it's not complete. And all those configurations represent everything that exists in the universe, right? And nothing is excluded. So there is no us and them. The question is what kind of forgetfulness or disconnect people have to the ancestral ritual obligations to the land. And so part of the deal is, if people talk now about decolonizing and abolitionists, but what you have to do is have to understand what our obligations are to the earth as human beings, period, and a larger community of beings. So this is what it's been. I mean, I can articulate it much better now than I could in 1980 when I got invited. And I called it lovingly kidnapped to do the ceremonies, because that's what they were teaching us, my teachers, how to understand the ritual obligations to the land that we live in. For me, and I came across this years ago. I feel like all the foods that we eat, everything that's growing on this land, all the atoms, all the molecules, all that stuff now makes our bones. So there is a resonance. The way I say it is, the stones have become our bones. So there is a resonance. So there's an indigenization that's taking place, right? The new native and everybody that's migrated, to whoever they are, even the native peoples or the first inhabitants, they came from somewhere over here, but eventually they got tuned by the land that they live in. So this is what we're doing now. We're tuning ourselves to the land that we live in. And like, I've seen it where our ancestors couldn't do this, but now we're doing it on their behalf. And I think for me, that's a big part of the legacy, especially, and me. My teacher, he always used to say, he used to talk about medications, how some people are on 3 or 4 prescription medications, and the medications get into your system. And he goes, at medicine A, he goes, "What are you doing here?" Medicine B, "What are you doing here?" Medicine C goes, "What are you doing here?" And they start fighting with each other. And pretty soon the body goes, "Where's the healing that's supposed to come?" And I thought about that, and I realized, what about the ancestry that's in me? I got Spanish, I had Polish, I have Maya Quiche in me, all that going on. So I have to figure out how that ancestry in me is going to come into in some sort of a parlay, right? In relationship, so that it's reflected. And if I can't do it inside of me, how am I going to do it outside in the culture? So,
thanks for that.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear, you mentioned your father actually had died, right? When you were 3, I think you said
3,
previous. Yeah. And in many ways, I mean, you told a story about how you acquired fathering or understand a father, but I'd love to hear that story.
Like I said, my father died when I was 3, and it was always mysterious how, and my family always said, "Oh, he died in a car accident. No, they couldn't get him to the hospital." That's the narrative that was. And eventually I found out that I always suspected that he'd been murdered, and finally it was confirmed. But so that's just the way that it was. And people do terrible things to each other because of jealousy or motives. But when I was 12 years old, my mother put me in a boarding school. And within the first 3 days that I was there, every single boy that was there had a memory of their father, a specific I had no memories of my father. So I decided that I was going to steal fathering. I was going to learn something about fathering from every man that I met. So I was stealing fathering. So I've done that since I was basically 12 years old. So the fathering to me meeting somebody, especially an older man, was always an opportunity to learn something from. So.
It strikes me as well that so much of this gathering as well, right? We even heard it and yesterday, I think, in the lodge, but there was a sentiment that, I have also repeated and I share, which is to find older men that seemed worthy of attempting to be, right? That there's something useful after a certain age rather than, golfing and gated communities or something, right? And for you, also, I imagine back in, 80s, maybe early 90s even, meeting these, I think this indigenous medicine men or whatever, it became your almost like sought after discomfort, I would say. Like, that was also something mentioned in the lodge, like that discomfort actually can have a tempering.
Yeah.
Right. And that seems to be the nature of true mentorship. And so I wonder if you might speak to that, of your own tempering.
Well, there's a certain cultivation of a state of being through repetitiveness. I'm a musician, so hours and hours and hours of practice can be challenging. So I've always found that interest and curiosity create a certain state of being where how much time is spent, it doesn't matter anymore, because the interest and the curiosity are opening doorways that you never thought would be possibly open, that could possibly open. So that to me also takes care of a lot of the cultivating the muscle memory that you need in order to be coherent at a certain, or have proficiency with a certain language or a certain discipline. So that to me is a big thing. In terms of what I got from my teachers was a sense of protection. One of the when the community that we started in LA was led by two different individuals. One of them was a Lakota man named Wallace Black Elk and his wife, Grace Spotted Eagle, and by another Muskogee Creek medicine man named Marcellus Williams. And they had other leaders that would also come and teach us things. So at some point in time, somebody had made a threat to the group that we had in LA. And so I called up Marcellus and I said, what do we do? And we flew out to New Mexico and we got into a sweat lodge. And the very first thing that he said when we were sitting in the lodge after all the stones had come in is he said, whatever comes after you is going to have to go through me first. I had never heard anybody say that to me, period, ever in my life. Not even my father or my mother or my uncles. Nobody, no adult and no coherent adult in my family had ever said that. And the relief that I felt coming in, I all of a sudden was a 2-year-old or a newborn feeling unconditionally loved and protected. And so part of what we try to do, or at least what I try to do when we come to these gatherings and through the ceremonies that I lead and participate in, is also to create that kind of protection where the individual, the soul and the core of the individual is protected at all costs. So no matter what happens, there is a sense of belonging that it's unconditional love. So for me, that's really important. Yeah.
It seems to me that one of the core wounds of the times, and maybe let's just speak to men, is that sense of younger men in particular, but lostness, right? Not a sense of belonging, not a sense of, coherent mentorship, you could say, right? Other older men who are vying for the same things as the younger men, right? Like a sense of, maybe this is what Bly meant in sibling society, right? Everything's flatlined. And that's not the case, of course, in cultures that are somewhat intact, that have that sense of, what might you call that? I've heard like natural order or sacred order, this and that. Like there's appropriate topography to living cultures.
There is. But the thing is that you have to recognize the termination of stages of development, right? So we go through our first challenge is to emerge from the womb of the mother. You come from a wet, dark environment to a dry, harsh, bright. So the first thing that happens is you sever either you go through the amniotic sac or you sever the umbilical cord. So the womb of the mother transposes or turns into the womb of the house, and then the womb of the house goes to the womb of school or whatever institutions you belong to. Every time you cross a threshold like that, there has to be a line of demarcation that this stage is now over and you can now move into the next one. And the next biggest one is going from early childhood into adulthood. That has to be clearly marked. If it's not clearly marked, the soul doesn't know that time is over, and so there's doubt, right? So you have to clearly mark those stages of development. The first year that I Sundance, my first experience in Sundancing is I'm not going to explain the whole ceremony here, but it involves standing in front of the tree of life and then getting connected to the tree. The first thing that I felt when I stood in front of the tree for the very first time, I felt a huge bolt of energy come out of my belly and attach itself directly to the tree. So the tree became my placenta. The world was my womb. So it made me realize that you have to, initiation for me, in my particular, is connecting the child from the physical parents to the universal parents, to the physical, from the physical mother to the universal mother, from the physical father to the universal father. And for us in particular, for men in particular, is that we don't have the biology that women have. So at 13 years old, we have to go through some sort of a formative process that allows us to cultivate, and we have to make a commitment to be responsible and participate in the cycles of life. If we don't do that in some physical form, there's a huge backlog of work that has to be taken care of. And so that means, and what happens in the culture is we have substituted wounding for tempering. So we confuse that, and people call a wounding experience an initiation. It is not. And that's really has to be made really clear. You need a tempering process that allows you to figure out how you're going to get in sync with the cycles of life. Like I said, for women, it happens automatically. For men have to commit. That's why you have all these ceremonies that require arduous fasting, giving of yourself in some sort of capacity. Blood is involved in some ways. That's the way it was with the Sundance. We had to get pierced and cut and tied to the tree. For some people don't have to do that when they're Sundance, but some sort of a challenging time, no food for days or nights or a number of days is also involved in privations that allow you to cultivate a relationship. So
I've participated in a 4-year cycle of, it wasn't called a vision fast. It was just called a sit, right? Just sit.
Nice.
Just sit out, but it incorporated the fasting and the time out there. And one of the things that really stuck with me, I completed it 3 years ago. So it was 4 sequential years. And one of the things that stuck with me was a kind of withering encounter with everything, the vaster intelligence of life itself.
Yeah.
And that to the ego, it's a kind of trauma, right? A kind of necessary trauma. I think Martin Shaw talks about this as well. It's this need to encounter something bigger than yourself, particularly for men as well, that, the ego can really be withered in the face of the enormity. And it's not obvious though, right? Like this is where I think the fasting and the deprivation and the kind of the intentional diminishment comes in, right? You're not firing on all cylinders. You're not, well fed, well slept. And it's harder to make that connection when that's the case. So with all the deprivation, suddenly you're able to encounter the vaster everything. And in a culture that doesn't have okay, this is what it means now, like being welcomed into whatever you might say, the next phase or the participation in all life, then it can remain kind of traumatizing, right? And I think this is where mayhem is different than initiation. And when we're talking about culturally held and endorsed.
Yeah, it's something that's tended to meticulously for a long period of time, in like Damascus steel being made. It takes over and over, heating up, cooling down, pounding, the beating. So it's like the repetitiveness, which repetition is not redundancy. Repetition is amplification or cultivation of a particular state of being. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I understand as well you worked in prisons, is that right? Or also with youth?
No, I work, we got involved, we started a mentoring group. One of the things that Michael did, following through the starting of the men's conferences, bringing in people of color, right, or in multi-ethnicities, they were also trying to figure out how to work with marginalized groups. One of them was bringing people in that had been formerly incarcerated and also bringing at-risk youth. So we started mentoring. We did a conference in Fairfax, California in 1995, where we had 50 at-risk youth from 4 different cities: Bay Area, Chicago, LA, and New Orleans, and at the end of that conference, basically, those of us that lived in LA decided to stay in touch and created a mentoring group, and they would meet once a month. They had a couple of meetings once a month, and one of them involved house meetings, but the other one was participation in ceremonies, which was the sweat lodge. I was running sweats at that time, community sweats once a month at this place in Malibu where we had met. Wow. And I've been running sweats there since 1993 on an ongoing basis. But the mentoring group that we started in 1993 is still ongoing today, and I'm still in touch with some of the kids that we started mentoring in 1993. Some of them are now lawyers, counselors, and they work with different organizations like you hear Homeboy Industries, Anti-Recidivism Coalition, Street Poets, Youth Mentoring Connection. All these kids basically got out. So we have ancillary or backup. So we become like the elders and the mentors, right? So
And what did you find that these young men and those you said who had been incarcerated, what were they looking for? Maybe they didn't know until it was there.
At the retreat in Fairfax, I made it a point to talk to every single one of the kids. And the one thing that stood out in my mind is all of them said a version of this. They had never had a reasonable conversation with a man over 25 ever in their lives. So what I saw is that these kids have no fathering. And could it be that simple? And the answer is yes, it's that simple. Is it easy? Not in a long shot. I had a friend of mine who's been working with incarcerated youth in Ventura County for 20 some odd years. I called him up 3 or 4 years ago and I said, if you were to see a world without prisons, what would be your recommendation? He said 2 words: better parenting. I knew a guy, and this is in 1973, mind you, who was a consultant for the sheriff's department in Denver County. I was living in Colorado at the time. And he was saying to me how he got hired to assess how much more, but they were going to have to hire more sheriffs, more police force in Denver County for anticipating the growth of crime. And he said, you don't need more police, you need more schools, which is basically the same thing. So mentoring or teaching and mentoring and which is basically, it's ancillary to fathering. So it's fathering in the community, right? For both men and women. The parents, the single parent household is a fallacy. It does not work. It's impossible. Parents are incapable. It's not a justifiable task for them to have that. So,
and what would you say is the one of the functions or a couple of the functions of fathering based on this understanding? I mean, I'm a father myself. I have a 6-year-old. Do you have kids as well?
I had 4 kids. One of my oldest passed away almost 2 years ago, but I have 3. Yeah, I have 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fathering. I'd love to hear. Yeah. What do you understand is one of the functions or the necessity of fathering in the raising of kids?
Fathering is teaching, right? Through emulating behavior. And what I learned fathering by reverse. I knew what I didn't have when I was a kid. So that's what I tried to provide, especially my daughters. I have a son now who's 20, who will turn 20 sometime next year. And so it's more in depth now than it was when I was in my 20s. My first kid was born when I was 17 years old. Wow. So I was not prepared to be a father, but I was willing to undertake the responsibility. And so a lot of people are not taught how to parent. They're not taught how to love unconditionally. They're not taught how to dialogue, how to mirror the child properly, how to just hold a child particular and basically understand that the child needs to be held and loved unconditionally. And it's that simple. Is it easy? Not by a long shot, especially when you're trying to uncouple from long patterns of behavior that have been handed down for generations that you don't think you have an option in enacting or enacting that way. So
I've also heard this sense that fathering is like a bringing out into the world in a way, like as in introducing a challenge and adventure or whatever, like within the limits, but also actually guiding them to those and beyond. And is that truth for you?
I think it's a way to support curiosity without conditions. Like, for instance, some fathering people want the child to do exactly what the father or the parent wants them to do. And to me, it's more important to see what the child is interested in and not putting any constraints on that. And that's true of any parenting, whether it's mothering or fathering. And in some cases, I think the roles should not be genderized. The protection and feeding of the child should be done equally by both parents, whatever gender they are, or however, especially now that you have single gender parents raising children, either 2 women or 2 men, or multiple parents for that matter, if you're in one of those households. So the whole idea is to create a certain level in which you support what the interest of the child is, so to keep that curiosity and interest alive, and how the child can be engaged. Yeah.
Well, this strikes me too, that the function of gathering in times when, i.e. the village for so many is not here, right? But we can come together in a sort of village way in times and days and weeks sometimes, right, around ceremony. And even particularly here, there's a real heart of healing that comes forth, right, through the capacity to grieve, to connect with joy, And I wonder for you, you said something in there, I think maybe it was your teacher had said, there's something about the amplification of healing in community.
Oh, no, that was a conversation that I had with James Hillman.
Oh,
We were
of course.
we were at Camp Miller one year, and we had one of those very powerful evening sessions, where everybody was like cracked open and feeling loved and be able to feel unburdened from their whatever was going on in their lives. And he said to me, "Isn't that amazing?" He goes, in 2 hours we did what would have taken 20 years in the therapist room to do." And so he said the healing energy in community is exponentially multiplied. So that to me is a huge. It was a confirmation of something that I had already knew because I had experienced it in sundancing and in vision questing and doing sweat lodges for many years already at that time. But it made it even it articulated it for me in such a way so that you could figure out how to make that happen in different circumstances, not just ceremony too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
A lot of men suffer from what's been called like the lone wolf syndrome, right? The sense of I'm alone, I got to do it myself. I can't really ask for help or reach out. And that ends up condemning a lot of men to isolation, despair, depression, suicide even. And so I wonder for you, and for me, even with this work with men in particular, right? Coming together around myth and story and ritual, it seems to feed some place that, I didn't know was possible before this, that men could come together in this way. And for you as well, it sounds like you maybe had a sense of what you saw when you encountered it because of your own experiences in, these other medicine places.
I lived, my family life when I was a kid was very crazy. A lot of fighting, a lot of drinking, a lot of banging things would happen. And so I used to regulate myself by being in nature. I've spent hours listening to the sounds of nature. I would go sit down by a river, sometimes a little stream, and listen to the water gurgle over rocks. I have many memories of going around and walking around in rainstorms, blizzards and rainstorms, and getting regulated. And also listening to dawn choruses. In Guatemala in the early 60s, there was still tons of wildlife, and dawns there were pretty, and I still have a memory of what that was like. So I used nature as a way to regulate myself when I couldn't find it and I found refuge, and I would read a lot of mythology when I was a kid to figure out how the little guy, I still have memories of the little shepherd trying to, squeeze water from a rock and finding a piece of cheese. I remember that story. I still have the books in my house, as a matter of fact, that I used to read when I was a kid. Fairy tales from in Spanish. There was a great collection published in Spain that I still have today. So I found different ways of figuring out how to regulate. So I think what we have to cultivate is, if we can't find it in humans, find it in nature. And that it's also the world of the unseen, right? So, which is a world of ancestry, all in the world of that's around us, the plants and the animals too. So, elements.
Now, you told a story too, and I'd love maybe for you to recount a version of it. You went to some interfaith gathering, I think, right? And everybody went around, and that's helpful. I actually set up my next question. But if you'd tell that story.
Oh yeah, one of my adopted sons now. At that time, he was just one of my mentees. He said, "You got to go to this a conference on healing that was it was at the Western Justice Center in Pasadena in LA, and it has something to do with they were trying to figure out how to deal with the level of violence that especially in LA. And so they had several ministers, 2 or 3 priests, a couple of rabbis, and a couple of imams, and they were all there representing their respective religions. And it comes to me, and what are you doing here? And I said, I'm here to represent the earth. And they said, oh, you're one of those guys. Literally, that's what they said. You're one of those guys. So I was there. I was surprised, but they couldn't understand the value of that, of the song of the earth, so.
I like that, the song of the earth. And I would say my perception here, we've just met, the last few days, and my sense of what your role has been here so far, we're day 3, I think, has been really to hold that song and to hold the heart of that song within the group here. And I wonder if you might speak to that in terms of its the necessity of that, I would say, within a particular gathering like this.
Part of it is understanding the relationship to prayer and to the holy that's not conditional. I think a lot of the belief systems that we are involved in this world are very conditional as how they're going to create a link And in our philosophy, I'll say it this way: in what I was taught, they have what they call hollow bone, which is you create a link, but then you leave it completely empty, so the relationship to source is direct from the individual to source, to the primordial source, unconditional. Most religions have a list of things that you gotta comply with before you can actually are allowed to access exactly. And by the time you get through the list, you're so exhausted or confused, you have no idea if you've ever actually connected to essence. So my job here is to create as direct of a link as possible for people with the unseen, the unknown, and the holy, and in such a way that you can actually reconfigure yourself. My experience in my parents were doctors. My father was a surgeon. My uncle was a surgeon. My mother was a nurse. I have two aunts that are nurses involved in. I have two cousins that are nurses. So everything in my family was directly related to healing. When I was in high school here, I worked for 2 years in an emergency room as an orderly, trying to figure out if I was going to go to medical school. And one of the things that I learned is that people that go to hospitals, in particular, that have either allow terrible things to happen to them or they do terrible things to themselves so they can go somewhere to be safe. And that's safety. So how do you create that kind of safety? Unconditional love that you can be related to in some form. So people go through all kinds of stuff and do all kinds of crazy things like that, or go to religions so how to create that safety? Like what my adopted grandfather said, whatever's going to come after you is going to have to go through me first, and how to provide that. For us, there's been some violation at a deep core level. Most of us, my experience is that something like 60 or 70% of everybody across the board has some sort of trauma in their life, and you can't. Those are just raw statistics after tracking at-risk youth, people in the military, people in and out of prison, people in and out of the gangs, people in rehab. And I can tell you that after 45 years of listening to stories, I can pretty much say that almost all of us are not conceived under ideal circumstances. So that means that the blessing has to be retroactive to the point of conception, so that the individual knows that you are connected to the holy in some form, and you're okay, and there's a place for you in this world. So this is what we're looking for, the fact that do we belong? Alienation to me is one of the huge I don't, but it's just the sense of that has to be dealt with. It's a huge force that has to be reconciled in some form. Yeah.
I've heard, I can't remember who told me this, but it was something in regards to initiation and how that we come into this world and we, in some ways, maybe a lot of people have this conscious or unconscious sense that they didn't choose it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, I'm just here, and of course, if they feel definitely hard done by the circumstances, you might feel like, well, that's my duty to check out, or I have this, I can choose to check out if I want, because I didn't choose this, it's this kind of understandable grievance, right? Depending on the cards you've been dealt. But for a lot of folks, maybe they have that sense like, I didn't really choose this, so do I belong here? And something around initiation seems to be this sense that you go through something and you have now the choice. Because oftentimes I think rites of passage have this quality of a brush with death, right? In some fashion. Mm-hmm. And I understand, maybe in older traditional cultures, or maybe even today, of course, certain trials are actually quite significant.
The people will die during initiation. Yeah. It's just a malodome to talk about that all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. So, And in Water and Spirit, I think he details that quite a bit, right? And it's pretty intense, right? You're like, I mean, lawsuits abound. If you do anything close to that, it would be over here. And yet, of course, the flip side of that, of course, is there's very little trial or tribulation that actually tempers and invites in that possibility that you can choose from then on a sense of like, okay, now I'm choosing to be here. Like the power of a youth, for example, to navigate that terrain and then to get on the other side, to be confirmed and blessed perhaps by an elder, right, or a mentor, and to say, okay, now you can choose to be here if you want, because now you know a bit more of the stakes, a bit more of the grander story of things, So I just want to name that. I do think that like a lot of youth, I think, struggle with that lostness too, because they almost have to like self-confer with no map of the terrain.
But I think, to go back to that Krzyzewski quote, the map is not the territory. But to me, if you don't have what I learned when we started working with vets, and that's a whole other story. But when I started working with vets, we started doing retreats, right? And one of the things that I heard many of the vets say is, I don't want to talk about what happened in the war or in the service. I want to talk about what happened before the service, before the war. So that goes back again to what is going on in the homes. Safety is a huge issue, and for most individuals don't have a sense of a coherent home life, of a coherent father and or coherent parenting combination that's effective and nourishing and protecting and teaching and holding, in some form. So you have to set those parameters up somehow. So there's retroactive before you can go on. So you have to get caught up. Mm-hmm. I worked one time. I had a conversation with a gentleman who he trained. His job was to train policemen. And he said, my job when I go out is to go out on their first patrols. And I got to make sure that the guy behind the wheel is not some 4-year-old that's getting beat up by his dad. Wow. Talk about being current. If you're a 4-year-old that's still being beat up by your dad or your mom, you still have to make peace with that, So that's that biography part of the life that has to be, and then you have to go back and re-sanctify the child so that the 4-year-old can feel like a healthy, blessed 4-year-old, not a curse. So how far back do you go? So I always try to go back to conception for that. So,
well, let's shift to this conference again. That we're 40 years in, right. And that's enough. That's a good amount of time.
Sure, yeah.
And I wonder for you. I get the impression again as a younger, I'm in my early 40s now, and finding Iron John at 35, a little bit more in the wake of what seems to have been a bit of quite a party, with like a lot of these, Bly and Malidoma, and, some of them now, of course, those two have passed on. Yeah. Mead's still around, of course, but I mean, Hillman as well has passed. So my sense is I'm just curious about those days. Did it feel like a kind of, this is a heyday of something significant, or was it normal? I just wonder for you, you've seen now the span of time.
For me, it was a convergence of things that I've been looking for a long time. And it's like you merge into a stream. It's like all of a sudden you find yourself with traveling companions that have similar goals and aspirations about how to contribute to the well-being of the world without any attachment to how it's going to be done. But this is what we need to do in order to be alive, to be human beings in a larger community of beings. So it's like finding common allies, like finding family, like the family that you never knew you had, but there it is. So some of that, and to me, what I feel about this, that seeded something that now it seems to be multiplying. And to me, it has legs, because I look at, for instance, I have young people, not young now, they're in their 40s now, who have basically acknowledged that because they came into contact with how we were doing things and what we were doing, that their lives were saved. And what was interesting to me, we were at a youth retreat a couple of years ago, and one of the young guys said, I want to be a grandfather. And that to me was and I hold that moment. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but to have, like I said, going back to the youth that were never the other youth, the other thing that those youth were, like I shared earlier about, that had never even talked to a man over 25. Most of them would not be expect to be alive to be 25 years old. They did not expect to be that old, And so for this young man to say, I want to be a grandfather, that's a huge accomplishment, to say, I want to participate in life in some form. So for us to be able to invite others to participate and to be. I remember we were doing a closing ritual one time at Camp Miller. And we had prepared beautiful, it was a very complex ceremony. And at one point, it was one of those things that you will only see once in a lifetime. There's a full moon with a rainbow in the middle, and there's a flock of eagles flying. There's a thunderhead with lightning, all in light shimmering on the lake. And we had made this incredible, all kinds of offerings. And I had a row of elders lined up. And at one point, the youth come out, and they had prepared this amazing gift that they were taken to the water to give in, a community gift. And I could see the old guys, those little expletive deleted here and how come they get to do that and we didn't get to do that? So I could see them, those little blah blah blah,
like
whatever.
envy, kind of.
Yeah. It was total envy, resentment, and anger. And I said to all of them, I said, to all the guys, you bless them right now. By blessing them, you're blessing yourselves at that age.
Mm.
So, and all the guys teared up. All the guys teared up. And you realize that there's a blessing that most of us never got from a father, mother, and or teacher or significant person in our lives when we were at a very critical, crucial. And for years, I had people calling me up with all kinds of stuff. And when you sit down and talk to them, that was the deal. They had never been blessed by a parent in particular or a teacher at a significant point in their life. And it's important to always bless. So that's critical, blessing. Yeah.
I've heard this too about Bly, that he carried that capacity to bless.
Yeah. He at times, yes, he could be yes, he could be. He could also say, stop that stuff. No, that's nonsense. Go away. He could. And in the earlier days, he was a lot more volatile. When I met him, he had already been around, and he was a lot more mellower, from what I understand. So like I said, I didn't meet him till like 91 or 92. So yeah.
And I think that there's something in, teaching that is a tempering, as you say, right?
Yes,
or a whetstone.
Yeah.
Right. And then also knowing the difference between the moment, right? If a blessing's actually required, or actually is it a harder lesson or something, right?
It's a harder, but you also have to understand that a mentor is not a tormentor, So you can be a tough teacher, but you don't have to be an asshole to be a teacher, So that's important too. The tempering does not require a whip. You have to figure out how to cultivate that and how to get the interest, but it's not. And there's a lot of teachings that I know music teachers that are that way. The guys that were teaching drumming, I used to give lessons to this one guy, and he'd been taking lessons from this other guy in LA for years, and he started coming to me for lessons, and I said to him, "Did you ever learn any rudiments?" And he said, "No." And one time he's sitting there after the lesson, he goes, "I get it. You want me to be good, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I actually want you to enjoy drumming and be good." And he had an epiphany, and all he needed was some sort of acknowledgement for being a human being. And he never came back, but I could see by the smile on his face, that's what he needed, some sort of validation as a human being, So
it strikes me then too that we, and maybe I say more the youngers. So again, the 40s, the 30s. We did that thing here in the time where we stood up, and the distribution was actually pretty good in the age range. There was a couple under 30s, more so certainly in the 30s and 40s, and maybe into the 50s, and there was a good contingent right in the 60s and up.
Yeah.
And it struck me that a lot of these men, including yourself, were in that initial wave, right, of that happening, right, with Bly and these fellows that they blessed, it seemed, right, to those even now, right, the other fellows, Walton and Tim, these fellows now, they're telling their stories here. I know they've been doing it a little while, but it just struck me again, like there's been a kind of, a wake has passed into a kind of blessing to carry this in some way.
Yes.
And I wonder for you as well, because again, you straddle, many years of them present and now years of Bly now and the other world and beyond. And what are you seeing now? Is it kind of a time of waiting for next big personalities to come up, or is it actually that was a particular moment that was needed?
I think it's a moment that was needed, and for me, it's not about the personality; it's about the office. So it's and I said I had conversations here, especially when Robert didn't come around. I said it's not about having a huge personality. It's about the office. It should be office driven, not personality driven. Those are the exact words that I use. So that means that the integrity of the event is never compromised because we know how to hold space. So that to me is really important. And also the other thing that ties into this, as you were saying this, I was thinking for us developmentally, you have to transition from a youth into an adult, into an elder, and it has to be clearly marked. There's a lot of grown-ups running around ruining the world that look like they look like adults and they look like elders, but they're still 4-year-olds or 2-year-olds kicking each other in the shins and biting each other, incessantly. And that's what you see. I mean, I used to see that with just look at the United States Congress. You have people basically acting their shoe size, not their age, which means they're still in some form a 2-year-old, not a 42-year-old. So then it had to get people current, and the disentanglement, the entangling that they've gotten, how they gotten themselves tangled up through not only family structure, history, cultural history, and religious history that they all ascribe to. So that's what we have to deal here with. Our job, one of our missions, right? Marcellus was really strong about this. Don't add to the confusion on the planet. It was one of the things he used to hammer into us all the time,
So it strikes me that the possibility of gathering like this, in particular with men, is what comes to me as like a pocket of coherence or something, right?
Sure, yeah.
Some sense of the possibility of that, that men, I mean, there's lots of constellations that can come together. Myself, I've been drawn largely over the last decade to men scenes, not just, but there is a power, right, in men gathering like this.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious for you to name as well, what have you seen of the power, particularly for men, to come together like this?
I've seen coherence come at a core from surface to core, which I think is really important, and the development of eloquence, right, and elegance, and basically style, living in grace, and being tolerant and understanding that we are not just the only species that matters in this world, So, and that's important in not only interracial but interspecies relationship, the human and non-human kin. The non-human are our kin, So I like to talk to trees the same way I talk to people. To me, there's no difference in some form. And as a matter of fact, I read this in a book a couple of years ago, one of the military books that I recommend for people who are working with vets. But the guy said, I have a lot more respect for trees than I do for humans because of the way the way trees treat each other is not the way humans treat each other. As an advanced species, we have a lot that leaves to be desired, how we treat each other. It's just unbelievable,
So it strikes me then coherence in this format or this kind of gathering for men, like I find with the presence of women, it just changes things, right?
Yeah.
It's just different. There's just different dynamics at play. There's, it could be mother projections, there could be, attraction, whatever. It just can be something different.
Yeah.
Whereas in men, there's the possibility of, again, a certain kind of polarized coherence. And that perhaps allows them, like you're saying, to shed the conditioning or the self-involvement in a way, which is different than I think interior life, which I think has been spoken here, like the importance of having a kind of protected interior life for men, but also the capacity to see the world itself, right? And kind of drop the navel gazing in certain ways, right? To be able to see, oh, wait, we're part of something bigger.
See, that question has a wide berth, right? So for me, it's hard to put a beat on it specific, how to specifically respond to that.
Maybe I could, phrase it slightly different.
Phrase it slightly different, yeah.
As one who I understand gathers with many folks in many different ways, right, around ceremony in particular, in other ways, what do you particularly appreciate about gathering with men?
I think there's a coherence that comes into being, and children, they sense that incoherence in grown-ups right away. If there's no coherence at a core level with what they see on the surface, right away, they will not want to trust the individual, period. So what happens for us here is, as humans, we reclaim ourselves as human beings, in our humanity. As humans, we all do the same things. Everybody hates, everybody kills, everybody destroys, everybody makes great food, everybody makes great art. It's not it's not just the black people that do this or just the white people that do this. We all do it. So part of these gatherings are reclaiming our humanity, period. And this comes before gender, even. We're humans, period. And I don't care where so we're humans first, men and women and everything in between second, and then come all those socioeconomic and ethnic brackets, and people will argue with me to death. But I've seen it long enough. I'm 71 years old now, and I can say this with some impunity. This is where we have to, if we reclaim ourselves as human beings, not as men or women or whatever, BIPOC, all that stuff, it has a place, but also it's also a surface layer. And if you don't have coherence with what happened at the integrity, at a core level, nothing is going to work. I've been following what I call the dialectics of activism since I was 10 years old, 7 years old, actually. I used to sit up and listen to Che Guevara and Fidel Castro speeches on the radio when I was a kid. I still remember the call from Radio Habana. Esta es Radio Habana, Cuba. All that, I know all that stuff. I saw the revolutionary movements come to a grinding halt in Latin America for a number of reasons. And the biggest one is that all the ideology was useless because the people had not done their internal work. They could not handle the responsibilities of power, for one thing, and they couldn't choose power over service. They couldn't choose service over power. So everything crashed and burned. A lot of the activist movements, to me, crash and burn because the people don't do their internal work. And their internal work has to do with reclaiming yourself or really understanding what it is to be a human being in a larger community of beings. I mean, I'll say it, it always comes back to that, but to me, you go back to what happened in the beginning. What was the story? What went down? And I'm not saying there's something, but in case it did, we got to go retroactively there and put a blessing on that part of the being. And to get there, right, you have to go through a minefield and then throw a bunch of IEDs, if you know what IED is, to get to where the soul is, because you're talking about agreements that the soul made with the body to keep the individual alive. And when you're renegotiating those agreements, what are you doing? What are you offering so that those agreements can be released? Mm-hmm. So you can live in a different configuration. So that's being in the territory and understanding what the value or the imposition that those maps have put on us, right? So
I really like how you said that about power, right? The capacity. Maybe I paraphrase as the capacity to handle power well.
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of. We don't have to talk about any particular politician, but that there's some real. It seems like inability or misuse of power. And if we talk about men as well, that men unaware of their power. Like my friend, he said some phrase one time. We were just kind of on a road trip. We're talking about just men and women and, our responsibility and all this. And he said, men can eat the safety of a room. Men can eat the safety of a room. And I think
women can too. Don't delude yourself. But yeah. I mean, that's really important. And women sometimes won't own up to it, but they,
sure.
Yeah. So yeah.
I think there's a particular menace though, right? That can also come, right?
Sure. Violence. Absolutely. It's yeah. Oh yeah.
And that there's a certain responsibility as well, right? Of carrying power. And like you said, not doing the inner work means when power is thrust upon you, or likely unearned, right? Earned or not, or systemically bestowed, then the ability to wield power well is something that we don't seem to see a lot of, right? And for me, that speaks to, again, all of these things about tempering, initiation, mentorship, keeping an eye to the big story, right? The kinship of all life as the context, rather than the myopia of, human-centric goals and ego and things like that. So for men, it seems vital, important that there's a willingness to do this kind of work.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And in particular, for me, places like this and contexts like this, through story, through ritual, ceremony, song, through grief, right, seem to be the kind of cauldron that can offer that pathway. So I wonder if you might speak to that. And again, the particular configuration that this gathering has been, right, and its significance for you over the years and for men who keep coming.
Well, for me in particular, one of the things that I had to choose when I was younger, when it came to what I was going to do in the world, I knew I had to help people. I knew that. I was not sure of how I was going to do it because after working in the hospital for 2 years, I realized that the medical route was not necessarily a route of my choice. That I didn't want to go there. Many of the surgeons that were working in that emergency room were also studying to be psychiatrists. To me, it was a very interesting thing. Because if you're looking for the root of the disease, you learn if you're a real healer, it's not always in the body; it's somewhere else, in the soul or in the mind, or connection between all three of those aspects, right? So I read a lot. I read all kinds of books, and one of the books that I remember reading in the early 70s was The Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castañeda. He said, when you're coming into consciousness, the first choice you make when you have relationship to energy is, are you going to use it for power? He said the difference between a sorcerer and a medicine man or a healer is this. A sorcerer will always choose power, and the medicine man, the healer, will always choose service. So when you choose power, you're not accountable to anything. You're just accountable to your whims and desires. Whereas if you choose service, you will always be in service to life. So for me, the choice was really easy. I'm in service to life. And I will be challenged by that all my life. To this day, I've been at this, like I said, since I was about 10 years old in some form, trying to figure this out, So it will always be that way. But I know now basically how to understand how to stay behind the medicine so that we're in service to life. And as long as we understand that we're in service to life, then everything always lines up because all kinds of allies and support will always show up. So I look at it as being in service to what does life need. And also what I look at what we do is this is land business. The land has taken us here, over there, and putting us in these very interesting configurations that are forcing us to learn how to be with each other. I go back to the poetry that I was reading, right? The poem from Humberto Acabal that says, roots tell us through the flowers what the earth is like on the inside. Our responsibility now is to find out how we are directly connected to source and contribute from that. And that's the remaking of the wheel. The hoop, in so many traditions, they say has been broken. Our job is to restore that hoop from how we are connected to spirit, to essence, in a whole new different configuration, and be willing to let go of the old configurations because they are obviously not working. If you look at the world today, you got to realize some of this shit is not good and we got to throw it out. It's just the stories that we were told were not good stories. So we have to find, like you read like a Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, right? Braiding Sweetgrass, that difference between Eve and Sky Woman. It's a huge piece, right? Understanding the difference between commandment and instruction. So you're restructuring the what do they call it? The parameters, the belief structures, right? The semantic structure of the world that we have, that's been embedded in our European-based consciousness for over 15,000 years. This is not new. This is there's iterations. Some people believe the moment we moved into cities, this is when things started going wrong. And there are a number of great books out there that have great words about this. Like, what is it? The Dawn of Everything is a great book. I recommend that to everybody. 1491 is another great book. Diaspora's Children, another great book to read about this particular. These are different configurations of how we are split off, not only from ourselves, from the world that we live in. So any kind of an opportunity that we have now to confirm that we are in relationship, that the world is not the other. It's this and that and the other and all three of them, So that's part of why I do this, and when I see the kids that are being born today and how they are looking at the world, and these are kids that I've seen sired from people that I know that have been coming and participating. I have hope. I have, in spite of how dire it may look right now, that we might be able to create a strand that survives the challenges, because the challenges are going to be deep. But I have hope. I really do. And the fact that this has lasted this long, 40 some odd years now, but it's part of a dream that was started by my teachers. They said to us, don't you think it's hard for us after 400 plus years, or 500 years for that matter, of post-colonization and conquest, for them to, I made friends with Humberto Acabal, a Maya Quiche poet, and he became a dear, dear brother. And you saw how powerful his poetry is. And he was not shy about, this is what we need to do in order to transcend the legacy that we've, so part of this work is decolonization, is abolitionist, but it's about relational to, and not blaming, but being able to move beyond the tropes that are so embedded in the culture today, semantics, belief structures, right? Renegotiating all those agreements. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, Miguel, deeply appreciate our conversation today. Thanks for taking the time and holding the heart of this gathering for so long as you have.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with Miguel Rivera. Now, if you're a man and would love to experience the Minnesota Men's Conference for yourself, you're in luck, because the 41st edition is happening in early October in Minnesota, and you can check out all the details on their website, minnesotamensconference.com. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, share it with your friends, and post to social media. It really does help spread the word to get this out to the right folks. So thank you once again.